The morning Harry Potter turned 11, the house at number 4, Privet Drive, did not acknowledge it. Breakfast was a performance of deliberate ignorance. Dudley's presence overflowed onto 2 chairs and parted the floor. The Dursleys gathered around them in the satisfied silence of people who had done something correctly. Harry sat at the other end of the table and ate cold toast, and did not make anything of it. He had checked the calendar, a furtive check, as most of his checking was, and confirmed what he already knew. 11. It was his birthday. It felt the same as 10. When the dishes were done, he went upstairs to Dudley's second bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the window. A lawnmower ran 2 houses down. The sky had no opinion. He was thinking about the letters. 12 of them, addressed in green ink, to Asterisk, Mr. H. Potter, the smallest bedroom, 4, Privet Drive, I've asterisked. Someone had known about the bedroom. The thought produced 2 feelings at once. Unease, because strangers shouldn't know the layout of the house, and something under that, something harder to name, which felt uncomfortably like being seen. Harry had read the front of one before. It was snatched away. Asterisk Hogwarts, School of Witchcraft and Wizardry asterisk. He had been turning the words over since he was still turning them over when the knock came. It was not a knock. It was an event. The door shuddered. Something cracked. Aunt Petunia made a sound caught between outrage and fright. And then the door opened, and Harry was on the stairs before he decided to move. The man in the doorway was the largest person Harry had ever seen. He had to turn sideways to fit through the frame, and even then his shoulders scraped the wood. A wild black beard spread across his chest like something that had never been introduced to scissors. His hands were the size of bin lids. His eyes, beetle black, bright, warm in the way of someone who had decided that warmth was simply how they operated, were creased at the corners with years of it. He was carrying, tucked under one arm, a cake. Its green icing read asterisk, Happy Birthday Harry asterisk, in letters that grew ambitious before running out of room. Harry! His voice was like good news delivered from somewhere underground. He beamed down the stairs. Look at ya! You've got James's hair. And your mum's eyes. I'd know you anywhere. He held out the cake. Rubeus Hagrid, I've come to fetch you, and I've brought you this, and it's been far too long since anyone did either. Happy birthday. Harry came down and took the cake. It was heavier than it looked. The icing was homemade, the real kind, gritty with too much sugar, uneven and imperfect, and somehow entirely right. Something about it made him trust the man immediately, without being able to explain why. Hagrid moved into the hallway, and the hallway arranged itself around him. He looked around the Dursleys' immaculate, aggressively ordinary house, with benign and faintly sorrowful appraisal. Behind him, Uncle Vernon had gone a remarkable color, and Aunt Petunia was pressed against the wall, with the expression of someone who had been waiting for a long time, for exactly this. Dudley had appeared from the sitting room, taken one look, and vanished again. Right, Hagrid said. I expect you've got questions. Harry had been collecting questions for some time, with nowhere to put them. He chose the most pressing. Are you the one who's been writing to me? Headmaster Dumbledore's been writing. I've been sent to fetch you. Hagrid produced a letter from his coat and handed it over. You've got a place at Hogwarts. It's a school. The best one there is, and it's past time you knew why. He sat down on the hallway floor. The floor accepted this with reluctance. He looked at Harry with the gravity of someone who had rehearsed this conversation. You're a wizard. Harry was quiet for a moment. He was thinking about a boa constrictor at the zoo. Dudley's birthday, a different year. He'd stood in front of the glass, and for a few seconds he and the snake had looked at each other with the specific understanding of two creatures who knew what it felt like to be on the wrong side of something. Then the glass had gone. He had a long list of things like that: a teacher's wig turning blue, finding himself on a school roof with no memory of climbing, strange occurrences he'd learned not to examine. He examined them now. "Okay," he said. He had prepared for more resistance. "I have questions," Harry added. "But, okay." The smile that broke across Hagrid's face was enormous, even by the generous standards of his face. He produced the letter properly, and Harry read it twice. Asterisk, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Asterisk, a list of books and equipment and instructions signed by someone named McGonagall in ink, dried on a diagonal. "There's a place to buy all this," Harry said. "Diagon Alley in London. We're going today." They went through the Leaky Cauldron, a dim, smoke-worn pub that Harry would have walked past 1,000 times without registering, and Hagrid stepped up to the brick wall at the back. He drew out the pink umbrella he carried in place of a wand, and tapped it against the brickwork, 3 up, 2 across. The bricks folded back, a cobbled street. Impossible, improbable, alive with people and noise and color. Cauldrons in a shop window stacked to the ceiling. Robes in jewel colors. An owl studying the world from a cage with composed authority. Somewhere, a voice was making an argument about quality. The air smelled of parchment and candle wax and something else, old and warm and particular, like the inside of a library that had been treated with great care. Harry stood in the archway and didn't move for a moment. 11 years of being told, in ways both explicit and structural, exactly how much room he was permitted to occupy. He had learned to want carefully and need quietly and be grateful for small things. He had assumed, without deciding to, that this was simply how the world was built. The street in front of him looked like it had been built by people who had never heard of that arrangement. He didn't say any of this. He moved his glasses up his nose and followed Hagrid through. Gringotts stood at the end of the street, white and imposing in the way of institutions that have never needed to explain themselves. They went up the steps, through the bronze doors, through the silver doors, into a marble hall where chandeliers threw clear, deliberate light over a long counter at which goblins sat, working through transactions with unhurried absorption. The floor was cold and precise underfoot. Hagrid stepped up to the counter with the confidence of a man who expected the world to cooperate. Harry stood at his elbow. "We've come to make a withdrawal," Hagrid said. He produced the small gold key from his coat and held it up. "Potter Vault. I'm Rubeus Hagrid, representing Professor Dumbledore." The goblin at the counter looked at the key. He did not take it immediately. He looked at it with the specific lateral attention of someone comparing what they see against something they already know. Then at Hagrid, then briefly at Harry, a noting rather than a seeing, the way you note something you've been expecting. "One moment," the goblin said. He stepped down from his stool and moved to the panelled wall behind the counter, where a door, Harry hadn't noticed before, opened to receive him, and then closed with quiet finality. Hagrid rocked back on his heels. He was entirely unconcerned. He clasped his enormous hands behind his back and looked around the marble hall with the settled patience of a man who understood the situation. Harry looked at the door. He had been 11 years old for approximately 4 hours. In that time, the floor he'd understood himself to be standing on had turned out to be a trap-door over something much larger and stranger, and he was apparently only now being permitted to look at it. He was not a boy who panicked. He was a boy who stood still and paid attention. So he stood still. He watched the door. He waited. Hagrid went on rocking on his heels, whistling something tuneless and cheerful under his breath, as though nothing in the world had any reason to go wrong. The goblin did not come back. Harry looked down at the marble floor, pale and even beneath his trainers. He had the feeling, the quiet, particular instinct he had learned over years to take seriously, that something in this room had just quietly changed, that a question had been asked somewhere, not aloud, in a language he hadn't known existed until today. He had been 11 for 4 hours. The day had not so far followed any script he recognized. And something told him, standing in the marble entrance of Gringotts Wizarding Bank, with a birthday cake waiting for him upstairs in a house where no one cared about his birthday, that it was not done with surprises yet. The goblin was gone for 6 minutes. Harry counted because counting was the kind of thing he did in rooms where he wasn't sure what was happening, kept track of the facts he could be certain of, stayed quiet, watched. The marble hall conducted its business around them with complete indifference, impervious to the minor drama of 2 people waiting at a counter. Hagrid rocked on his heels, hands clasped behind his back, unhurried. He was not worried. This was clear from every dimension of him. Harry was not quite worried either. He was something more specific. He was paying attention. The door in the panelled wall opened again, at exactly the 6-minute mark, and the goblin who came out was not the one who had gone in. The original goblin was there, but he had brought company. The second goblin was older. Something in the set of his shoulders, or the economy of his movement, or the way he carried the large leather-bound ledger under one arm, as though it were both unremarkable and absolutely definitive. His expression of professional displeasure was entirely impersonal. It wasn't directed at Hagrid or at Harry. It was simply the face he wore for situations that required careful attention. He stopped at the counter. He set the ledger down. He opened it to a page marked with a dark ribbon and looked at it for a moment, and then he looked at the small gold key that Hagrid was still holding up. Slightly less confidently now, Harry noticed, the way you hold something out when you've begun to wonder whether it's the right thing. "This is the key to the Potter Trust vault," the senior goblin said. "Not a question. That's right," Hagrid said, with the brightness of a man relieved to be confirmed. "Number 687. We're here to make a withdrawal for." "The Potter Trust vault is a ring-fenced sub-account," the senior goblin said. "It is not the Potter estate." He looked at the ledger, then at Hagrid. "The primary Potter account record shows the last authorized activity as the 31st of October, 1981. No trustee has been named to the account. No account manager has been appointed. Gringotts has received no notification of any guardianship arrangement affecting this estate, a pause that was not dramatic but was deliberate. The key you are carrying grants access to a pocket money allocation. It does not represent the estate. Silence." Hagrid's brow had furrowed in the way it furrowed when he was confronted with something he hadn't expected and was trying to fit it around what he already knew. "Right," he said slowly, "but Dumbledore arranged all of it. He gave me the key. He said I was to bring Harry here to collect money for school things, and that everything was sorted. Dumbledore sorts things." He said this last part with the confidence of someone stating a natural law. "Professor Dumbledore," the senior goblin said, with the patient precision of someone who had both said and meant sentences like this before, "is not named in the Potter estate records. He has no standing in this account. Whatever arrangements he has made are not registered with Gringotts, and under Goblin banking law, an unregistered arrangement is not an arrangement. It is an absence. But he has no standing," the senior goblin said again, not unkindly. He appeared to understand, that this was the part that would need to be said more than once. Hagrid looked at Harry. Harry looked at Hagrid. Then Harry looked at the senior goblin. "What's the trust vault?" he asked. Not quite a question, because he wasn't yet sure which question he was really asking. The senior goblin looked at him directly for the first time in the conversation, and something shifted in the quality of his attention. It wasn't pity, and it wasn't the particular kind of irritated patience Harry had learned to recognize in adults who had not asked for him to be their problem. It was something more neutral than either. It was the even, calibrated regard of someone who was looking at a relevant party. The trust vault, the goblin said, holds an allocation, a portion of the estate's annual yield, ring-fenced for the account holder's incidental expenses during minority. He consulted the ledger. The pause was brief and entirely without emphasis. Relative to the full Potter account, the trust vault represents... He glanced at the column of figures on the open page. A rounding error. Harry had no framework for what a rounding error was exactly. He knew it was not a compliment. He had never had money, had subsisted on charity, hand-me-downs, the leftovers of other people's decisions about what he was permitted. He had no frame of reference for numbers like the ones visible at the edge of the open ledger. He looked at them and tried to understand what they were. The senior goblin gave him a moment. Then, "I am invoking a stewardship review of the Potter estate." The words landed with the particular weight of sentences that have been refined by long institutional use until they carry their precise meaning and nothing else. This is a Gringotts banking proceeding for accounts where a minor holds primary account status in the absence of an authorized wizard trustee. It is governed by goblin banking law and is not subject to outside review or interference. He looked at Harry. The shift in his address was slight but real. He was not speaking past Harry anymore, or above him. He was speaking to him. As the primary account holder, you have the right to be present throughout these proceedings. You have the right to hear all findings. You have the right to put questions to the account manager. These are your rights. Harry had never been informed of his rights under any law, banking or otherwise. The experience was strange. Something offered that he hadn't known to expect. "All right," he said. Hagrid, however, had gathered himself. "Now, hang on," he said, urgency replacing bewilderment. "Harry's starting at Hogwarts in September, and he needs his books and his wand and everything on the list. And Dumbledore will want to know about any proceeding. I think we ought to do what we came to do first, and then Dumbledore can sort out the rest." "The review is not optional under goblin banking law," the senior goblin said. His patience was genuine and entirely unmoved. "Mr. Potter may collect his school allocation from the trust vault in due course. The review will proceed. You are welcome to contact Professor Dumbledore." A pause without hostility. "He will find that his position in this matter is unchanged." Hagrid looked at Harry. His face was doing something complicated. It was trying to reassure and not quite managing it, which meant he was telling the truth about how reassured he wasn't. Harry looked back at him, and then at the door the goblins were gesturing toward. There was a thing happening here, and he was the primary account holder, a phrase no one had ever applied to him before, and he wanted to understand what it meant. He followed the goblins. The room they were shown to was not the cart tunnels Harry had been picturing. It was smaller and far older. Stone walls worn smooth, a long table rubbed to a low shine by decades of use, oil lamps throwing a warm and serious light. It smelled of parchment and iron and something mineral underneath. There were no windows. The room felt like it had been here before the bank was built around it. Harry sat in the chair he was directed to. It was slightly too large for him in the way that most chairs were. Hagrid settled beside him, bent forward, enormous hands resting on the table, mouth pressed into a shape that was trying to be optimistic. Head was trying to be. The senior goblin took the head of the table. He opened the ledger with the precise care of someone handling a record of the dead. He turned the pages deliberately, and then he stopped, and he turned the book so Harry could see it, and pressed one long, pale finger against the top of the open page. A name, in old ink, in a hand that had written it carefully. Asterisk Potter, James asterisk, and below it, in a different ink, newer or added later by a different hand, asterisk Potter, Harry James asterisk. His father's name above his own. The column of figures that ran down the page below them was long enough that he had to count the digits twice, and the second count agreed with the first, and he sat with that for a moment. Outside this room, Diagon Alley was going about the bright, ordinary business of a summer morning. In here there was only the ledger and the names and the oil lamps burning with steady clarity, and no one was in any hurry. Harry looked at the column of figures, then he looked at the senior goblin. "Is all of that mine?" he said. "It is the Potter estate," the goblin said. "You are the heir," which is a more precise answer, and one this proceeding will examine in full. He did not close the ledger. The names stayed on the table between them, and the figures below them, and the lamps burned on. The account manager who came in was a different goblin from the senior one, younger, or at least differently aged, with wire-framed spectacles that suggested he spent considerable time reading things in low light. He settled across the stone table from Harry, with the ledger open in front of him, and a secondary file of documents laid beside it. He did not introduce himself. He opened to the first substantive page, adjusted his spectacles, and began. "The primary source of the Potter estate," he said, "is a commercial interest, Fleamont Potter. The account holder's paternal grandfather was the proprietor of Sleekeasy's hair potion. Sales of the company under his direction," he glanced at the file, "quadrupled the family gold. The business was sold upon Mr. Fleamont Potter's retirement for what the record characterizes as a vast profit." He said all of this in the register of someone reading weather conditions for a city he'd never visited. Accurate, complete, and entirely without inflection. Harry was listening in the focused way he listened to things that mattered, his whole attention, not just the surface of it. Over the past hour, he had developed the habit, as a survival mechanism, of taking each piece of information and storing it rather than reacting to it. This went in the box for things that existed before he was born. That went in the box for things that were apparently his, the box for things he'd believed about himself this morning. Small, unremarkable, belonging to nobody, was not being added to. Fleamont Potter and his wife, Euphemia Potter, died of dragon pox in 1978-79, the account manager continued. Their deaths occurred shortly after the marriage of their son, James Potter, to one Lily Evans. As the sole heir, James Potter inherited the full Potter estate at that time and held it as primary account holder from that date until the 31st of October 1981. There was that date again. Harry had already noticed it recurring in the senior goblin's presentation, in the formal findings document, and now here. He had known, in the vague way, children know things about their own history that they've been told without being asked, that his parents had died when he was a baby. He had not known the specific date. He was fairly certain he would not forget it. The account manager moved through a column of estate assets in the same level: voice, property, holdings, financial instruments, which Harry tried to attach a shape to and couldn't quite, because the scale of it was too far outside anything he'd ever had to imagine. He had grown up understanding himself to be the kind of person to whom large things did not belong. He was having to revise that understanding in real time in the basement of a bank on his birthday. Then the account manager turned a page and paused. "The estate includes a documented heirloom of line inheritance," he said. "One invisibility cloak, recorded as a Peveril family inheritance, transmitted through the Potter line to James Potter, and by succession to the current account holder." He turned the ledger briefly so Harry could see the relevant entry, a short notarized paragraph with a lineage annotation beside it, then returned it to his side of the table. "The item is catalogued separately from the financial assets as an heirloom of established lineage." Harry had no idea what a Peveril was. He had no idea what an invisibility cloak was, either. The name was self-explanatory in the way of things that are too strange to fully believe, which was, he was beginning to notice, a category of experience that was accumulating rather quickly this morning. He filed both facts in the box labeled asterisk, things to understand later, asterisk, which was getting crowded, and said nothing. The account manager turned to the final section. "Account contacts and legal designations," he said. He ran one finger down the page. "Designated trustee for minor heir. None registered. Designated guardian for minor heir." A brief pause to find his place, entirely procedural. Sirius Black Vault 711, House Griffin Door. Named in the estate record. He looked up. He was simply reporting what the page said. Harry looked at the name for a moment, then at the account manager. "Who is Sirius Black?" "The designated guardian," the account manager said. That is what the estate record establishes. It wasn't evasion, Harry understood. It was the precise scope of what the ledger could tell him. The goblin was answering from the document in front of him, and the document said, "Guardian." That was the entirety of what the document said, and anything beyond it was outside the document's authority. Harry looked at Hagrid. Add track. He had been watching Hagrid out of the corner of his attention throughout this entire meeting, in the way he watched most things, not directly enough to appear to be watching, but steadily enough to notice. He had watched Hagrid's cheerful certainty migrate, over the past hour, through confusion and into a careful, effortful composure. He recognized that kind of composure. He'd practiced it himself, in different circumstances, for different reasons. The particular face you put on when you cannot show what you're feeling. But what was on Hagrid's face right now when the name Sirius Black came off the page was not composure. It was the collapse of composure. Everything composure is designed to prevent arriving at once. Not in the way you know a name from a newspaper or a rumor. It's in the way you know a name that belongs to a chapter of your life you've thought about a great deal and set aside. And then someone says it out loud in a stone room, and suddenly the chapter is open again. His beetle black eyes had gone very still. He was not looking at Harry. He was looking at his own enormous hands, resting flat on the table. Harry kept watching him. Gringotts has no record of any legal change to this guardianship designation, the account manager continued. His voice was unchanged. The designated guardian has made no contact with this institution. The estate has operated without an authorized wizard trustee for 10 years, from October 1981 to the present date. He made a notation in the secondary file. This concludes the initial review of the estate record. He closed the ledger. The oil lamps went on burning with their steady, patient light. The room smelled of parchment and iron. Harry looked at the closed cover and thought about the things inside it. His grandfather's company, his grandmother. He'd never heard of his father's name above his own, in 2 different inks. An invisibility cloak with a lineage name he didn't recognize. And at the very end of the account contacts section, a name. Asterisk. Sirius Black. Asterisk. It sat in his mind like a sentence someone had started and not finished. Like a door that had been left slightly open with no way yet of knowing what was on the other side. He did not ask where Sirius Black was. He did not ask why he had never heard the name before today, or what Hagrid's face meant, or any of the other questions that had formed themselves quietly and urgently in the back of his mind while the account manager read. He was 11 years old. He was sitting in a stone room on his birthday with a great deal of information he didn't yet know how to hold. He had learned over 11 years the discipline of not asking the question you most want to ask until you understand enough about the situation to survive the answer. He wasn't sure he was there yet. He looked at Hagrid's hands, enormous and still on the table. Something about the stillness of them was worse than anything the ledger had said. Hagrid was a person who expressed himself physically. Large gestures, loud footsteps, a laugh that rattled the furniture. The stillness was not his natural state. It meant something was keeping him there. Harry had learned to read the weight of other people's silences. This one was heavy enough to press on the air. Hagrid had not looked up. The account manager gathered his files and withdrew, leaving Harry and Hagrid alone in the stone room with the oil lamps and the closed ledger and the smell of old parchment. Hagrid had looked up. The stillness had broken the moment they were alone. And now he was doing something Harry hadn't seen him do before, searching for words in the careful, uncertain way of a person who knows what they feel, but has never been asked to translate it into sentences, and understands that the translation is going to matter. Dumbledore arranged all of it, Hagrid said finally. He addressed this to the space just past Harry's shoulder, the way you talk when you're not entirely certain of your reception. He sorted everything after your mum and dad. He gave me the key. He said I was to bring you here today for school money, and that everything was in order. Everything was always in order. When Dumbledore sorted it, the senior goblin who had re-entered silently and now sat at the far end of the table with his hands folded, waited. The address, Hagrid continued. The Dursley address that was for protection, your mum's blood. There's magic in it, in a sacrifice like hers, and Dumbledore put you there because it was the only place the protection worked. It wasn't just a house. It was the right house. He explained it to me. We are familiar with the magical principle you are describing, the senior goblin said. His voice was not unkind, which was harder to receive than unkindness would have been. It was something closer to professional regret. Professor Dumbledore's intent is not in question. The documentation of his arrangements is. The bank was not notified. No formal guardianship was registered with this institution. No trustee filing was made. In the absence of those records, his arrangements exist from Gringotts' perspective as an intention that was never formalized. Hagrid's brow furrowed. But couldn't they continue as they were? Harry's got school money in the vault, and September's not that far off. And if it's only a matter of paperwork, then we could. The stewardship review has been formally opened, the senior goblin said. It cannot be closed until its findings are compiled and a legal resolution proposed. This is not punitive, Mr. Hagrid. It is procedure. The account holder is a minor with no registered wizard trustee. The bank has a legal obligation to that account holder. That obligation does not suspend, because the situation was previously unaddressed. Hagrid sat back. His chair protested under him. His face had gone brick red, not the hot, threatening red Harry had seen on Uncle Vernon, which meant something was imminent, but a different kind. the red of a man who is profoundly uncomfortable and is trying his hardest to do the right thing and has started to wonder whether the right thing is still clear to him. "Right," he said. He pushed himself to his feet. "Right. Then I need to contact Professor Dumbledore. He'll want to know about this. And he'll want to—" He stopped. "He'll want to know." He looked at Harry with an expression that was trying very hard to be reassuring. "You'll be all right for a bit. There is a flu connection available to clients and their representatives," the senior goblin said. "Through the second door on the left in the corridor outside." Hagrid thanked him with a grateful nod and went. Each footstep retreated along the stone corridor, a small earthquake growing smaller, and then a door opened and closed, and the room was quiet. A junior goblin who had been sitting in the corner making notes, and who had managed until this moment to blend entirely into the wall, appeared at Harry's elbow. "Tea," he said. Harry looked at him. This was a startling pivot. "Yes." "Please." The tea arrived. It was strong and slightly too hot, in a cup sized for hands somewhat larger than Harry's. He wrapped both of his around it and looked at the table. The ledger was still there, closed. After a while, he looked at the junior goblin who had returned to his corner and was pretending to read his notes. "When you said the account hasn't had any authorized activity since October 1981, Harry said, keeping his voice careful, and even the voice he used when he wasn't sure yet whether he wanted the full answer. "What does that actually mean?" The junior goblin looked up. He had the expression of someone deciding whether a question fell within his remit. He appeared to decide that it did. "It means," he said, "that no one with standing has exercised any authority over this account in 10 years. No withdrawal from the main vault. No addition to the estate record. No trustee designation. No legal filing of any kind. No contact from any registered representative." He paused. "The account has been maintained, interest calculated, assets recorded, but no one with standing to act on the account's behalf has done so. Not once." "Since October 1981, Harry said. "Since October 1981, Harry held his tea and thought he was 11. His parents had died when he was 15 months old. 15 months, which was old enough to walk, probably, but not old enough to form memories that would still be there now. The murders were in October 1981. He had no version of that night inside him, nothing personal or immediate that corresponded to that date. It was a fact, a point on a line. But he could do arithmetic. 15 months old, 11 years since. The vault had been sealed since the night they died, and in that time, in the 10 years he had spent in a cupboard under the stairs, then a box room that smelled of broken toys, in clothes that had always belonged to Dudley first, eating the leftover ends of meals, no one thought to include him in all of that time. Gathering interest, and no one with standing had so much as filed a single piece of paper on his behalf. Not once. The junior goblin had been precise about that. He didn't feel angry. Or he did, but not yet in a form he could use. It was too new and too large, and he didn't yet know all the things it was made of. He set it aside carefully, in the way he'd learned to set things aside, and looked at the closed ledger. His father's name, then his own. A column of figures too long to count without looking twice. The door at the end of the corridor opened. Hagrid's footsteps came back along the stone floor, and then he appeared in the doorway of the meeting room, enormous, filling it almost completely, with an expression that was doing the careful, deliberate work of composure. "Dumbledore's coming," he said. "He'll be here shortly." His voice had the quality Harry recognized. He had heard it before in different places, and had learned to recognize it early because he'd had to. the specific pressured brightness of someone who is relieved the cavalry is coming, and something else underneath the relief that is quieter and more uncomfortable, that hasn't quite formed itself into a thought yet, but is forming. The sound of someone who has been helpful for a very long time, and has just for the first time wondered whether helpful was the same thing as right. Harry looked at him. "Good," he said. He meant it. He also set that aside. He turned the teacup in his hands and looked at the oil lamps burning their steady light against the old stone walls, and waited for what came next. Dumbledore arrived precisely when Hagrid had predicted, directly, which meant no more than 40 minutes had passed before Harry heard the footsteps in the outer corridor. A measured, unhurried step, entirely calm, completely in command of itself. He appeared in the doorway. Harry had no prior image of a headmaster against which to test the reality, so the reality could simply be what it was. Very tall, very old, with a long silver beard that fell past his belt, and half-moon spectacles perched on a nose that had clearly been broken at least once and never quite set straight. He wore deep blue robes with a faint pattern worked through them, something astronomical, constellations or celestial charts, and he moved through the doorway with the settled ease of someone who has never, in a very long life, entered a room he expected to lose. He saw Harry immediately. Something in his expression shifted, brief and genuine, something that lived around the half-moon spectacles, and was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. Then he turned to the senior goblin, who had appeared behind him, and the two of them exchanged words in low voices that Harry caught none of. The senior goblin said something. Dumbledore nodded. The senior goblin said, "If you will," and they withdrew together into the adjacent room, and the door closed between them. Harry looked at Hagrid. Hagrid was looking at the closed door with the expression of someone watching the thing they believe in most go into a situation they cannot personally affect, and trying to have confidence in it. The lamps. The parchment smell persisted. Harry's tea had long since gone cold. He did not ask Hagrid what was being said in the other room. He suspected Hagrid didn't know either, and more than that, he was occupied. He had accumulated in the past 2 hours more information about himself than in the previous 11 years combined. He was a wizard. He was an heir. He had a grandfather's commercial enterprise, an invisibility cloak of ancient lineage, a column of figures in a vault below London, untouched since the night his parents died, and at the bottom of an account contacts page, a name he didn't recognize that had made Hagrid go, still in the way of old grief. He was holding all of this. He would have thoughts about it later. Possibly quite substantial thoughts, but for now he was holding it. He had had a great deal of practice over 11 years at receiving information he was not permitted to respond to and storing it neatly until a safer moment. It had always been a survival skill. He had not until today ever considered that it might become something else, that it was also, apparently, a useful quality in someone sitting inside a banking proceeding, keeping track. The door opened. Dumbledore came out first, the senior goblin behind him, and there was something in the quality of Dumbledore's composure that told Harry the conversation had not gone the way he had intended. Not that his composure had broken, it hadn't. But there is a difference between composure that is at rest and composure that is doing work, and Harry had become, through necessity, fairly good at reading the difference. The senior goblin addressed Harry directly. "I will summarize what we have conveyed to Professor Dumbledore, so that the account holder has the same information." He paused. "Professor Dumbledore has described the nature of the blood protection arrangement and the reason for the Vault Key's delegation to Mr. Hagrid. He has described the circumstances of the named guardian's current situation. We have heard this account, we do not dispute it." He looked at Dumbledore, the even, impersonal regard of an institution for a person. without animus and without concession. "Headmaster, we are not the Ministry of Magic. We are not Hogwarts. We do not require your permission to conduct a stewardship review, and we do not require your approval to act on its findings. These matters are within Goblin jurisdiction." Dumbledore received this with composed courtesy. He did not look diminished by it. He looked like a man who had expected exactly this and had asked anyway because one always asked. "The findings," the senior goblin continued, turning back to Harry. "The Potter estate is without a legally authorized wizard trustee. The trust vault subaccount does not constitute estate management. The designated guardian in the estate record, Sirius Black, Vault 711, has been unable to exercise his standing for 10 years. Gringotts will appoint an independent goblin account manager to administer the estate until you reach wizarding majority at age 17. Harry processed this. 17 was 6 years away. An independent account manager, not Dumbledore, not anyone Dumbledore had arranged, would oversee the estate until then. He thought about the column of figures in the ledger, and what it meant for them to be managed by someone who answered to goblin banking law, rather than to any wizard's intentions. "There is one matter Professor Dumbledore has asked us to note," the senior goblin continued. "He has requested that any resolution of your guardianship situation preserve your ability to call the Dursley household your home on account of the blood protection. We have noted this request." A pause. "We have not committed to accommodating it," the senior goblin said. "The blood protection is outside our jurisdiction and not our expertise. What falls within our jurisdiction is the estate, and the estate will be managed accordingly." Dumbledore said quietly, "Thank you. It was a particular kind of gratitude, the kind that acknowledges what has been said without receiving it as more than it was." The goblins withdrew with the efficiency of an institution that understood when to leave people to themselves. They did not close the door fully. It stood slightly ajar, the corridor beyond it, empty and quiet. And then there was only Dumbledore and Harry and the meeting room, with its oil lamps and its stone table, and the ledger still lying closed. Between them Dumbledore crossed the room. He stopped at Harry's side of the table and looked down at him. He was still standing. There was something in how he looked at Harry, unguarded in a way that had not been visible in the room full of goblins, something genuine that lived behind the half-moon spectacles and was not calculation or strategy or the careful management of an 11-year-old boy. It was something simpler and less comfortable than any of those things. "Harry," he said just that. Harry looked up at him. He had a great many questions and had arranged them over the past 2 hours into something approaching order. There was one that kept rising to the top. "Who is Sirius Black?" Dumbledore did not answer immediately. The pause that followed was the kind that carries its own weight, not hesitation, not the gathering of words, but the pause of someone who has known this question was coming and has still not entirely found the way to begin. He sat down. Not at the head of the table where authority would have placed him, but across from Harry, at the side, the way you sit when you are trying to be a person and not a position. He folded his hands on the table. He looked at Harry. The ledger was between them, and the lamps burned steadily, and somewhere deep in the marble lobby of Gringotts Wizarding Bank, Hagrid was presumably sitting with his enormous hands on his knees, eating whatever he had found, and pretending with all the faithful, helpless love he was capable of that everything was going to be fine. The room was quiet in the particular way of rooms where something large is about to be said. Dumbledore had folded his hands on the table. He looked at them briefly, his own hands, the long fingers, and the old scarred knuckles, and then looked at Harry. The half-moon spectacles had not shifted. Neither had his expression, exactly. But there was something in the quality of his composure now that was different from the version he had deployed in the meeting with the goblins, more open, less managed. Sirius Black, he began, was James's oldest friend. He said it, the way you say something you have known for a very long time in private, and are saying aloud for the first time, carefully, as though the sentence deserved to be treated with a particular kind of respect. They were at Hogwarts together from the age of 11. Idju. They remained friends through everything that followed, through school, through the war, through the years when the world was becoming a very dangerous place, and most people were trying to decide which side of that danger to be on. By the time your parents were married, James and Sirius were the closest friends either of them had. They were inseparable in the way that some people are. He paused. When you were born, your parents chose a godfather for you. They chose Sirius. Harry had already seen the name in the ledger. He knew this piece of information in the factual sense. But there is a difference between reading a name in a column of legal designations and hearing someone who knew your parents say they chose him for you. The second version was a different kind of weight. He was your intended guardian, Dumbledore continued. In the event that something happened to James and Lily, Sirius was to take you. That was the plan. That was what your parents decided. Take you. Someone was to take you. Harry sat with that phrase for a moment. Not leave you at an address. Take you. He filed it away and kept his face even. What happened to him? He said. On the night your parents died, Dumbledore said. Sirius Black was accused of being a traitor. He was accused of having revealed your parents' location to Voldemort, of being the reason the Dark Lord found them that night. The following morning, he was found in the street after an altercation in which 13 people died. Peter Pettigrew, a mutual friend of James and Sirius's, and 12 Muggles. Sirius was arrested and taken to Azkaban. That was 10 years ago. Yes, he is still there. He is still there. Harry absorbed this in silence. He had known, from the account manager's precise recitation and from the specific quality of Hagrid's reaction, that something was wrong with the situation around Sirius Black. He had not known what shape the wrong was. Now he did. He let the shape settle. If he was my godfather, Harry said carefully, and he was arrested, why didn't someone else take the guardian designation? Why didn't anyone file something or tell the bank? He thought of the ledger, the empty trustee line, the column of things that should have existed and didn't. Why didn't anyone update the record? There was no formal legal process surrounding his imprisonment, Dumbledore said. He was sentenced without a trial. The administrative steps one would take after the guardianship filings, the legal designations, the correspondence with institutions, were not completed. So, no one updated the ledger. No one updated the ledger, and I went to the Dursleys. Yes, he said this plainly, not with qualification or preemptive explanation, simply, yes, your mother's sacrifice created a protection that was bound to one specific place. Her blood relative's home. Your Aunt Petunia is your mother's only living family. The protection functions only as long as you can call that house your home. It is real, Harry. The magic is genuine, and it has worked. You have been protected by it. I know, Harry said. He did know. He had been told twice already. He moved past it. You couldn't have told me that Sirius existed. Dumbledore was quiet. He was in Azkaban, Harry said. I understand that. He couldn't be my guardian while he was in prison. But you didn't need to tell me anything about his situation for me to know his name. You could have told me I had a godfather. I could have known that. He kept his voice. 11 years of keeping his voice level had given him a particular kind of control over it. I'm 11 years old. Today is the first time anyone has said his name to me. Dumbledore received this without deflection or softening. He looked at Harry with the same genuine attention he had shown since sitting down, the kind that had no buffer behind it. You are right, he said. Not. Asterisk. You have a point. Asterisk. Or asterisk. You must understand why asterisk, or any of the other constructions adults used when they wanted to acknowledge a complaint without accepting it. Just, you are right. Harry did not know what to do with that. He sat still and waited for the rest of it. I made a choice, Dumbledore said, to keep your world small. A boy who knew he had a godfather in Azkaban and an estate of the size we are discussing, and a lineage that runs as far back as your family's, that boy would have been considerably harder to keep out of view. And your being out of view, Harry, was part of what kept you safe. Voldemort was defeated. He was not gone. His allies were hiding. Some of them were looking. A famous Harry Potter, a wealthy Harry Potter, a Harry Potter who understood from an early age exactly what he was and what he stood to inherit. That boy would have been a visible target. I was trying to give you the years you needed to grow without becoming one. Harry listened to this. He heard it. He understood it in the way you understand a story that is internally consistent and true as far as it goes, and still doesn't go far enough. He believed that Dumbledore had believed it. He believed the blood protection. He believed Voldemort's allies had been a genuine danger. He also knew something else. He knew it the way you know a bone is broken before anyone has looked at the X-ray. The sensation is unmistakable before the name for it arrives. He was 11 years old, and he did not yet have the words for what he knew. So he did not say it. He sat with it in the part of himself he was careful with, and kept his face even. The door had been opened quietly a few minutes earlier, and Hagrid had been allowed back in. He was sitting in his corner chair, the one that would have held 3 adult wizards, and he was holding an enormous handkerchief to his face. Harry had known Hagrid for one day. He had in that one day understood that Hagrid was not a person who managed what he felt. He felt things at the scale of everything else about him, large and immediate and entirely undisguised. The warmth on Harry's birthday was immediate. The laughter was enormous. This was the same. Hagrid was crying silently. Not the kind of crying done for an audience, but the kind that happens because the thing is too large, and there is nothing else for it. He had been there. Harry understood that. He had collected Harry from Godric's Hollow the night after, and he had done it on a motorcycle. He would ask about the motorcycle later. Right now what mattered was Hagrid's face, which was telling him something simpler, that this man had known Sirius Black in the time before when things were different, and had thought for 10 years that Sirius had betrayed the people Hagrid loved most and had lived inside that belief, had handed a baby to someone else and kept loving both of them, had kept the love whole through the version of the story he'd been told, which was the terrible version, and gone on. Harry watched him and did not say anything. He turned back to the ledger. It was still open, the page with the contacts section, the name still there, asterisk Sirius, Black Vault 711, asterisk a person. Not a symbol or a story someone told you. A person currently in a place Harry couldn't picture, with a vault in this bank and his name in this ledger and no knowledge, as of today, that his godson had spent the morning asking questions with his name in them. Harry thought about that, The strange, specific fact of two people existing in the same moment without knowing the shape of each other's day. Sirius Black in Azkaban right now, Harry Potter in a stone meeting room right now. The information about one not reaching the other, the distance between knowing and being known. He reached across the table. He closed the ledger, slowly. The way you close a book at the end of a chapter, when you are not ready for the chapter to be over, when you need to sit with what happened before you can bear to know what comes next. His hand rested on the cover for a moment. The old gilt letters, the name *Potter*, pressed into the leather. He took his hand away. He looked at the closed ledger and did not open it again. The notice arrived by Goblin courier, not owl, which was itself informative. Minerva McGonagall was in her office when it came mid-morning, in the particular institutional quiet of a school without students. The courier set a sealed document on her desk, with the minimal courtesy of an institution accustomed to its correspondence being treated as serious, and left without waiting for acknowledgement. She read the notice standing. She always read things standing when she was not yet sure what they were. The notice was in the dry, formal register of Goblin banking correspondence which she had encountered before and had learned to pass. It informed her as the designated head of house for Gryffindor at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry that a stewardship review had been formally opened this date, the 31st of July 1991, regarding the account of Harry James Potter, primary account holder and sole heir minor. Per Goblin protocol, formal notice was dispatched to the incoming head of house of the school for which the minor was enrolled. She read it twice. For approximately 3 seconds, her face was not the one she wore in corridors, classrooms, and staff meetings. One underneath, the one she had practiced for 30 years not showing, because it served no professional purpose, and she was a person who did what served purpose, appeared, briefly, for those 3 seconds. Then it was gone. She placed the notice inside her traveling cloak, took her hat from the stand by the door, and went down the corridor at the specific brisk pace of a person who has somewhere to be and has already calculated the fastest route. She apparated to Diagon Alley and walked the rest. It was a bright, busy July morning. She moved through it without looking at any of it. The goblin who met her at the Gringotts entrance said nothing beyond what was required to direct her. She appreciated that. The meeting room was smaller than she had expected. Stone, oil lamps, the smell of old parchment and iron, the low-burning quality of a space that had been occupied for hours by people with something to resolve. They were all there when she was shown in. She stopped in the doorway for a moment and took inventory. Harry Potter was at the near end of the table. He was 11 now. Small, thin, wearing clothes that were not his own and a pair of glasses with the bridge held by a piece of spellotape. He was watching the room with the careful, peripheral attention of someone who had learned early that watching was safer than reacting. The kind of watchfulness you develop when you are not certain of your reception. Rubeus Hagrid was in the corner, which he filled almost completely. He was the color of a man who had done his very considerable best for someone he loved, and had recently begun to understand that his best had been operating without the full picture. His eyes were red. He met McGonagall's gaze briefly, then looked away. Albus Dumbledore was near the window. He was composed, in the precise way he was composed when something had not gone according to plan, and he had made the decision to absorb rather than resist it. He looked at her when she entered, with the expression of a man who had known this was coming. She looked at each of them in order. She sat down. She spoke to the senior goblin first. "Thank you for the notice." She meant the thanks, and she meant the formality both, registering that the notification was a professional courtesy and that it was being received as one by someone who understood the weight of it. Describe the estate's current legal status. 1 sentence, please. The senior goblin did so. It took 1 sentence. She nodded. She had no further questions for the goblin. She turned to Dumbledore. What followed was not a shouting match. McGonagall did not shout. I watched the Dursley house on the 1st of November 1981, she said. All day, from early morning until you arrived that evening. I sat across the street in the form of a cat. When you arrived, I told you the Dursleys were the wrong choice. I told you that the boy who was going to be the talk of our world should not be left with people like that. She was not raising her voice. She was not, despite the temptation, allowing any heat into the sentence. She was stating facts the way you state facts, when the facts have been waiting 10 years to be useful. At the time, I had only my instinct and my judgment. You had the magical rationale, the blood protection, and 3 decades of being right about things. I did not have standing to override you. No, Dumbledore said quietly. You did not. I have standing now. She set the Gringotts notice on the table between them, not theatrically. Simply, here is the document. The bank has formally established that this estate was managed without any authorized wizard oversight for 10 years. That is not my instinct. That is a goblin banking finding in a legal review that Gringotts opened of its own accord without being asked. I have something to stand on. She did not say, I told you so. She had thought it, very briefly, for approximately 2 of those 3 seconds in her office. She had set it aside. It was not useful, and it would not help Harry. And the only thing that was going to help Harry was what happened next. What are we going to do now, Albus? She used his first name. In 30 years of working beside him, she used it when she meant it, to land. It landed. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. The comprehensive, arranging quiet of someone who is deciding not the content of what they will say, but the form of it. I support the Goblin Account Manager appointment, he said. Fully and without reservation. The estate requires formal oversight, and the goblins are correct to provide it. He paused. I would ask that the blood protection be kept in view throughout whatever follows. Harry must be able to call Petunia's house his home. The magic requires it, and the magic is real. It has protected him. I'm not suggesting he be removed from Privet Drive, McGonagall said. I'm asking a different question. I am asking who decided, without any formal legal authority, without notifying the bank, without registering a guardianship, without telling the child that this was the arrangement. And I am asking whether those decisions will continue to be made by a single person, without oversight or accountability. She paused. The blood protection is a fact. A fact is not a justification for everything constructed around it. After a moment, Dumbledore said, No, it is not. They regarded each other with the particular expression that belongs to people who have collaborated for 30 years and are currently, for the first time in some of those years, in genuine disagreement about something that matters. Then McGonagall turned to Harry. He had been watching the entire exchange with the same careful, peripheral attention she had noted when she walked in, paying complete attention while appearing to pay moderate attention, which was a skill she recognized and which told her something. She looked at him directly. I will be your head of house at Hogwarts from September, she said. She said it to him, not past him, not above him, not in the register of someone explaining an administrative fact to a problem they are managing. To him, Gryffindor, assuming the sorting places you there, though there is nothing in this room that would surprise me about that, she held his gaze. I am also deputy headmistress of the school. If you want to understand anything that happened today, or anything that happened before today, or anything that happens between now and the 1st of September, my office door is not locked to my students. You may come to it at any point." Harry looked at her. He had the expression of someone receiving an unexpected offer and evaluating it with complete seriousness before deciding what to make of it. "Thank you," he said. "No qualification, no hesitation, just thank you." She did not add conditions to the offer, and he did not add conditions to the gratitude. It was a small, precise exchange. She found it, in this room and on this day, more significant than almost anything else that had been said. The room now held 4 people, and the newly appointed Goblin account manager and the ledger on the table between them. And the air had changed in the specific way that air changes when a situation is still unresolved. But the person who will resolve it is no longer the same person it was an hour ago. Dumbledore was still the most powerful wizard in the room. He was simply no longer the person who was going to decide what happened next. No one had said this. It had simply become true. The formal proceedings opened without ceremony, which Harry had come to understand was how Goblin formality operated. The structure was meticulous. The performance of it was not. The senior Goblin took his place at the head of the table with the manner of someone for whom a room with 4 humans and an open ledger was entirely ordinary, and began reading the findings into the record in the measured, unhurried voice of an institution that was going to proceed regardless of how the audience received it. The Potter Estate's primary holding, Fleamont Potter's Company, sold for a vast profit upon retirement, the proceeds having quadrupled the family gold. The Trust Vault sub-account, a ring-fenced allocation for incidental expenses during minority. The Peveril heirloom, 1 invisibility cloak, catalogued separately from the financial estate as a line inheritance. And Vault 711, active, held in the name of Sirius Black, and listed in the estate record as the account of the named guardian. The senior Goblin read all of this into the official record without pausing. Harry sat with his hands on the table and listened. The legal designation record came next. Harry James Potter, sole heir to the Potter estate, Sirius Black, named guardian for the minor heir. No subsequent legal designation change had been registered with Gringotts from the 31st of October 1981 to the present date. The estate had operated without an authorized wizard trustee for 10 years. He was listening with the composed attention of someone who had already read the document and was now listening to it, read aloud, and finding in that process no surprises. McGonagall was to Harry's left. Her hands were flat on the table. Her expression was the one she had worn since she sat down, the controlled, attentive expression of someone who is keeping what they feel separate from what the situation requires them to do. Hagrid was somewhere behind Harry. He had stopped trying to find a chair that fit him and had settled for leaning against the wall, which he did with the air of a man for whom walls were a reasonable piece of furniture. The senior Goblin reached the account manager appointment and read it formally into the record. Gringotts Wizarding Bank would appoint an independent Goblin account manager to oversee and administer the Potter estate until Harry James Potter reached wizarding majority at the age of 17. The appointment was effective immediately. No wizard would have access to the primary Potter Vault without the explicit personal approval of the account holder. "That last part," Harry said. The senior Goblin looked at him. "Yes, Mr. Potter. No wizard, that means anyone, including Professor Dumbledore. Including anyone whose standing in the account is not formally established by you as the account holder." "Yes." The Goblin's expression did not change. "This is consistent with your rights as account holder." Harry nodded. He did not look at Dumbledore when he did it, but he was aware peripherally of the quality of Dumbledore's stillness at the other end of the table, which had not changed. Dumbledore raised the blood protection formally. Harry must retain the ability to call number 4, Privet Drive, his home. The magic required it. His Aunt Petunia was his mother's only surviving blood relation. Whatever form the guardianship resolution ultimately took, he asked that it preserve the conditions under which the protection could continue to function. McGonagall spoke before the senior goblin could respond. "The account manager's appointment governs the estate," she said. "Not to Dumbledore. To the senior goblin it does not determine where Harry lives. These are distinct matters." "They are," the senior goblin said. He looked at Dumbledore. Professor Dumbledore's concern regarding the blood protection has been noted in the estate record. The account manager appointment does not affect the minor account holder's place of residence. Where Harry Potter lives is a matter of wizarding guardianship law and is outside the scope of this proceeding. Gringotts is addressing the estate. Dumbledore received this with a slight inclination of his head. "Thank you," he said. It was the same quality of gratitude as before, precise and honest about what it was receiving. Harry had been watching carefully, with the peripheral attention he developed when outcomes would matter to him, and no one had thought to ask his opinion. The senior goblin turned to him. "Mr. Potter, at this stage of the proceeding, you may issue any instructions you wish to the account manager regarding the trust vault allocation, the school expense fund. You are the account holder. This is your right." Harry looked at the table for a moment. He had been thinking about this since the account manager was mentioned, turning it over in the quiet part of his mind where he put things to examine, while the front of his mind was occupied with other things. "I'd like the school supplies bought from the trust vault, as it was always planned," he said. "Books, equipment, everything on the school list." "That should go ahead as normal," he paused. "And I'd like the main vault to stay closed. I don't want anything from it until I understand what's in it. I don't mean forever. I mean not yet." The goblins recorded this without comment. No one at the table said anything. McGonagall gave a very small, very contained nod that Harry filed away. The senior goblin then produced from the file he had been reading from throughout the proceedings a piece of parchment that was heavier than ordinary parchment and slightly warm in a way that made Harry's palm tingle when the goblin set it in front of him. It was a card, not the size of a playing card, but the size of something official, with clear letters pressed into it and gilt and a seal he didn't recognize. Asterisk, Harry James Potter, primary account holder. Potter Estate asterisk, not asterisk trust vault, sub-account allocated funds, asterisk the estate. He picked it up. It sat in his hand with the particular weight of something that had been waited for, not by him, who hadn't known it existed, but in some more abstract sense, the weight of a thing that had been unmoved for 10 years. He turned it over. The back had a line of text in a script he couldn't read. "That is your authorization," the senior goblin said. "It establishes your standing with this institution. Any goblin at any Gringotts counter will recognize it." Harry set it on the table in front of him. He looked at it for a moment, then he looked up, and without meaning to, he looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore was watching him. His expression was what it always was, the calm face, the composed attention, the half-moon spectacles. But Harry had been in this room with him long enough now to read a layer below that face, and what he saw beneath it was not what he would have expected. It was not calculation, it was not the strategic mind at work. It was something that did not have a tidy name, something in the vicinity of what you feel when you have built something and realize, looking at it, that the thing has outgrown the container. Not regret. Exactly. Something that was honest. in a way that was harder to receive than regret would have been. Harry looked back at the card. He didn't know what to do with that expression on Dumbledore's face. He put it in the same part of himself where he was keeping the other things he didn't yet know what to do with, and kept it there. The senior goblin formally closed the proceedings. The account manager, who had been present throughout, seated at the side of the table with an open notebook, making entries, closed the notebook and set it aside. The goblins began the quiet, efficient work of resetting the room, stacking documents, replacing the ledger in its case, extinguishing the oil lamps on the far wall one by one. Harry put the account card in his pocket. Hagrid appeared at his shoulder, or rather Hagrid appeared behind him and to his right, which was as close to appearing at his shoulder as someone of Hagrid's dimensions could manage. He said nothing. He simply put his arm around Harry's shoulders. The arm was the size of a beam, and the gesture was so thoroughly out of proportion to Harry's frame that it was almost funny, and not funny at all. Harry let him. He kept his hand in his pocket, the card pressed between his fingers. Outside this room, Diagon Alley was carrying on in the bright, ordinary fashion of a summer afternoon. He had come here this morning to get school money. He was leaving with a document, a formal appointment, and a long list of things he still didn't know what to do with. He walked out of the meeting room with Hagrid's arm around him, and did not look back. The account manager was still at the table when the formal proceedings closed, making final entries in his notebook, with the methodical patience of someone for whom endings were simply another kind of beginning. Harry had been watching him throughout the day, the junior presence at the edge of the formal proceedings, the quiet pen, the occasional glance that took in what was happening and recorded it without inflection. He waited until the senior goblin had left the room, until Dumbledore and McGonagall were speaking in low voices by the door, and then he leaned forward slightly. The estate record still lists Sirius Black as the designated guardian, Harry said. He kept his voice level, and even the voice he used for questions where he wasn't yet sure he wanted the full answer, but had decided he needed it. What does that mean? Legally? What does it mean that the name is still there? The account manager looked up from his notebook. He had the particular stillness of someone who has been waiting, without knowing it, for the question that was actually important. It means, he said, that no legally authorized substitution has been recorded with this institution. Gringotts holds a record of the designation that was made at the time the estate record was last updated. We hold no record of that designation being changed through any formal legal process. No court order, no substitute guardian filing of any kind. He paused. The name is still there, because nothing withstanding has removed it. Harry took that in slowly. And the fact that he's in prison. Imprisonment would typically trigger a formal guardianship substitution through the relevant legal authority, the account manager said. No such substitution was filed with Gringotts. From the perspective of this institution's records, the named guardian's status changed in practical terms, but not in legal ones. The record has not been updated to reflect an authorized substitution. Harry sat back. He looked at the ledger, closed now on the table, his name above Sirius Black's name. In a document no one had touched for 10 years, McGonagall had been listening from across the table. She turned to the account manager with the directness that Harry had come to understand was simply how she operated. No preamble, no negotiation about whether the question was going to be asked. Is there any mechanism, she said, by which Gringotts, as the institution holding this estate, can formally note to an external legal body that the named guardian's status is inconsistent with what this record establishes? That the estate's guardian designation has never been legally superseded, The account manager was quiet for a moment. He set his pen down with a deliberate, small movement that meant he was thinking, not stalling. "Gringotts cannot act as advocates in wizard legal proceedings," he said. "We have no standing in the Wizengamot, and we do not petition it. That is outside our jurisdiction, and we do not operate outside our jurisdiction." He paused. "What we can do is make a formal notation in the estate record. We can note in the official document that the named guardian's imprisonment has not been reflected by any substitute guardianship filing with this institution. That notation becomes part of the estate record. The estate record is available to any party with standing to request it." He looked at McGonagall. "The notation does not carry legal weight in wizarding proceedings. It is a banking record. But it is an accurate banking record, and accuracy is what we provide." McGonagall nodded once. Then she turned to Dumbledore. The room had gone quiet, in the particular way it went quiet when McGonagall was about to ask a question she already knew the shape of the answer to. "Was there a formal legal adjudication of Sirius Black's case?" she said. "A trial? A Wizengamot hearing? Any judicial proceeding?" Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Not the kind of quiet that was calculating what to say, the kind of quiet that was deciding whether to say what he had already decided. "No," he said. McGonagall's expression did not change. She had expected this, Harry thought, had asked because she needed it, said aloud in a room with witnesses. Not because the answer was a surprise. She waited. "He was sentenced directly to Azkaban," Dumbledore continued, "by Bartemius Crouch Sr., who was at that time the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. There were no judicial proceedings. The evidence was, the scene was clear, or appeared clear, and the times were not careful ones. Crouch was not a careful man by disposition, and the war had made him less so." The silence that followed was the kind that accumulates weight the longer it lasts. "Right," McGonagall said. "Just that." "Right." The word landed like the closing of a book. She looked at Dumbledore for a long moment. Dumbledore looked back at her with the expression of a man who had carried this knowledge for 10 years and had just set it down on a table in front of someone else and was watching to see what they would do with it. "I will pursue the question of Sirius Black's legal status through the Wizengamot," McGonagall said. She said it quietly, without announcement, in the manner of someone stating a decision rather than making one. "I am aware that you are Chief Warlock. I am also aware that the process I intend to pursue is one that will not require your endorsement to begin," Dumbledore said. "You may find it is more complicated than it appears, Minerva." She looked at him with the even regard of someone who has made the calculation and disagrees with the conclusion, but is not going to waste time arguing about it. Most right things are. Harry had been quiet throughout all of this. He was still holding the account card, had been holding it since the senior goblin gave it to him, turning it between his fingers without being entirely aware he was doing it. He was doing the thing he did when there was too much information to process, and the process needed to be pushed to a place where it could run without interference. He was filing things and thinking about something simpler on the surface. What he was thinking about on the surface was a prison he couldn't picture. Azkaban was a word he'd heard now several times, and it had weight, but no shape. He didn't know what it looked like. Didn't know how far away it was, didn't know what a person did inside it, or what it did to a person from the inside. Hagrid's face, when the name had come up, had been specific enough to carry a warning without words. Sirius Black was 31 years old. He had been in Azkaban since he was 21, had gone in when Harry was 15 months old, and could not have known that 10 years later an 11-year-old boy was going to sit in a stone room below London with his name still in a ledger. Harry turned the card over in his hands. The account manager was making the formal notation in the estate document, the pen moving in the precise, unhurried way of someone performing an official act that had to be done correctly. Harry watched him for a moment. Then, "Can Gringotts reach him?" he said. The account manager looked up. "Sirius Blackvault. 711 is his account, you said. He's an account holder here." Harry kept his voice careful. The same level voice. "Can Gringotts deliver a letter to someone in Azkaban, if the person has an active account?" The account manager was quiet for a moment, considering in the evaluating way of an institution, thinking about whether a question fell within its established procedures. "Gringotts communicates with account holders in all locations," he said. "This is standard practice. Account holders in unusual circumstances of incarceration or displacement are not excluded from banking correspondence. Vault 711 is active. Standard delivery to the account holder at their current location would be possible." Harry nodded slowly. "Thank you." He did not have a letter to send. He had nothing written, nothing decided, nothing he was ready to say to a person he had never met, who was 31 years old in a place he couldn't picture, and had known once. When Harry was too young to remember it, he was not ready. He understood that, but he put it away carefully. Not in the part of himself he shared, or the part he was currently using to navigate a room full of adults deciding things, in the deeper part, the quiet part, the part where he kept the useful information he wasn't ready to use yet. He had always had that part. He had needed it for as long as he could remember. He was going to need it for this, too. He set the account card flat on the table and looked at it, his name pressed into heavy parchment. A name in a record that was still there, 10 years later, because nothing withstanding had removed it. He picked the card back up and put it in his pocket. The meeting room was quiet in a way it hadn't been all day. The Goblins had gone to file documents, some procedural aftermath of the formal proceedings that required presence elsewhere and permitted Harry to simply sit. Hagrid had been steered, gently but conclusively, into the corridor by McGonagall, who had said something to him in a low voice that Harry hadn't caught. Dumbledore and McGonagall were speaking near the door in voices that were not intended to carry. Harry was at the table alone with the oil lamps and the smell of parchment and iron that had been the background condition of his entire day. He took the account card out of his pocket and set it on the table in front of him. Asterisk, Harry James Potter, primary account holder, Potter Estate asterisk. He had seen his name in 2 places before today. On the envelopes, the green ink letters, 12 of them, addressed to asterisk, Mr. H. Potter, the smallest bedroom, 4, Privet Drive. I've asterisk in a hand he now knew was McGonagall's. Before the smallest bedroom, before he'd been old enough to complain convincingly about the spiders, before Aunt Petunia had decided the bedroom upstairs was easier than explaining the cupboard to visitors. His name had been on a strip of tape on the cupboard door at number 4. It had been a label. His name as a label for a storage space that was also where they kept the boy. His name on this card was something else. It wasn't a label, it was a claim. He wasn't sure yet. He'd spent 11 years learning the discipline of not having them. He thought about his parents. He knew their names now in a different way than he had known them this morning. He had known them in the vague, tender way. You know, names that belong to dead people who are also supposed to be important to you. A shape with no texture, a fact you carry without being able to put it anywhere. Now he had dates. James Potter, born the 27th of March, 1960, died the 31st of October, 1981. Age at death, 21. Lily Potter, born the 30th of January, 1960, died the same night, also 21. Harry worked this through slowly. He was 11. He would turn 12 in a year. His parents had died at 21. If he counted forward from 11 to 21, he got 10 years. His parents had been, at the moment of their deaths, barely more than 10 years older than he was right now. He sat with that for a while. It didn't produce an emotion, so much as a shift in scale, the way distances change when you walk them instead of looking at them on a map. He had known, abstractly, that his parents had been young. He had not done the specific arithmetic before. He thought about Godric's Hollow. He had heard the name today. The account manager had said it, and then Dumbledore had said it, and both had said it in the way you say, a name that carries events inside it that don't need to be listed again. A village in the West Country. A house there. Their house. His parents' house. The house where it happened. He had heard that the ruins were preserved. He had heard that there was a war memorial there that looked like an ordinary statue to people who couldn't see the wizarding world, and showed his parents' faces to people who could. He had never been there. He had not known, until today, that there was a there to have never been to. He thought about Sirius, 31 years old, in a prison Harry still couldn't picture with any specificity. Harry had been at Privet Drive for 10 years. He was aware, turning this over, that these were fundamentally different situations. A falsely imprisoned man and a child, placed for his own protection with relatives who hadn't wanted him, were not the same thing. He kept trying to make the arithmetic feel like it demonstrated this clearly. It didn't quite. He thought about Dumbledore. The half-moon spectacles and the genuine warmth behind them. Not performed warmth, not the careful warmth of strategy, but the real variety, the kind that lived in the lines at the corners of the eyes. He had seen it. He believed it was real. He also held, in a separate part of his mind, the thing Dumbledore had said about keeping Harry's world small, about Harry's invisibility being a protective condition, about the calculation that had produced 11 years at number 4. He did not hate Dumbledore for it. He was 11 years old, and he had decided very early in his life that hating the people who were supposed to be taking care of you was an expense you couldn't afford. It cost too much, it took up too much of the internal space you needed for other things, and it didn't change the situation. He had spent 11 years not hating the Dursleys for exactly this reason which had left him, at 11, with a practiced ability to hold a grievance, in a part of himself that was insulated from the part he used to function. He filed Dumbledore's calculation away in that part. Not resolved, not forgiven. He wasn't sure forgiveness was the right word for something he hadn't fully understood yet. Just filed, kept, in a place he could come back to when he had more to bring to it. The chair beside him shifted. McGonagall sat down. She did not speak immediately. She looked at the account card on the table between them. She looked at it, the way she had looked at most things today, with steady, unhurried attention, as though looking was an act she took seriously and didn't rush. Harry waited. "Do you have questions?" she said. He did. He had a list that had been growing since early morning, cross-indexed and sorted by category. And it was currently very long. He looked at it internally for a moment, the whole of it at once, and found one category that was manageable. "Tell me about Hogwarts," he said. Not the estate, not Sirius, not the question he could see at the bottom of the list that he was not going to ask today. Just Hogwarts, the place he was going in September. The only piece of his future he'd been able to look at all day without something hurting on the other side of it. McGonagall looked at him for a moment. He thought she might probe, might ask whether he was sure that was the question, or note that there were others, but she didn't. She simply answered. "It is a castle," she said, "in the Scottish Highlands. 7 floors, dungeons below, more towers than I have ever successfully counted. A lake on one side that is very large and very old and has things living in it that you will learn about in time. She spoke in the even informative register of someone who loved a subject and had decided not to perform the love. There are about 142 staircases, some of which move. The grounds are extensive. There is a forest to the north that students are not permitted to enter. The ceiling of the great hall is enchanted to reflect the sky outside. She paused. On a clear night, the stars are extraordinary. Harry listened to all of this. He listened carefully, in the way he'd been listening all day, the complete attention rather than the surface attention. But for the first time since this morning, listening didn't feel like work. It felt like the opposite, like something he could follow without needing to brace for where it would land. September 1st, he said. The Hogwarts Express departs from platform 9 3/4 at King's Cross Station, London. She looked at him. You will not be unmet. He nodded. He looked at the account card. He picked it up and put it back in his pocket. He had one question left on the list, the one he was not going to ask today. He could feel it sitting there at the bottom. The question about whether Sirius was guilty. Not asterisk. Where is Sirius asterisk or asterisk? What happened to him? Those had been answered. The question underneath those, asterisk, did he do it? Asterisk, whether the man in the Gringotts ledger, the man at the bottom of a 10-year imprisonment, the man whose name had been Hagrid's old grief, and Dumbledore's careful pause, whether that man had actually betrayed his parents. Finding out. He was not going to ask it today. He was 11 years old, and he had spent this day receiving information at a rate that had used up most of what he had to receive it with. He would ask it later, when he had rebuilt enough of himself to be able to hear the answer either way and still know where he was standing. He sat with McGonagall in the quiet room and thought about a castle with 142 staircases and a lake with things living in it. And let September be where he was going. The corridor outside the meeting room was empty. Albus Dumbledore sat on the stone bench against the wall and looked at his hands. Everyone else had dispersed, Harry and McGonagall somewhere behind the closed door at the end of the corridor, Hagrid in the lobby in the particular way Hagrid occupied spaces he was too large for, with the patient, slightly miserable stoicism of a man who understood that the waiting was what was needed from him right now and was going to do it properly. The Goblins had gone about the purposeful business of an institution that had finished one thing and was already engaged in the next. The corridor was quiet. The lamps burned with their low, even light. He was 110 years old. He had sat in more difficult places than this. He had arrived at harder conclusions. He had held reckonings that cost more than this one, that turned on larger scales, that had consequences for more people than an 11-year-old boy and a man in a prison. He let himself have none of that comparison. He had learned over 110 years that the tactic of making a smaller wrong relative to a larger one was not an act of perspective, it was an act of evasion. He sat with the smaller wrong, or the wrong that had felt smaller, that he had allowed to feel smaller, and he looked at it. After the 30th of October, 1981, after the night at Godric's Hollow, after the morning that followed, he had made a set of decisions. He had placed Harry with Petunia Dursley because the blood protection required it. This was true. It remained true. Lily Potter's sacrifice had bound a protective magic to the home of her surviving blood, a magic that was specific, real, and not replicable anywhere else. He had not invented a reason to send Harry to Privet Drive. The reason existed. He had assessed the magic, and the magic was what it was. He held this. He did not use it as a shield for what came after. He simply held it, because a reckoning that discarded the true parts in order to feel more like an indictment was not a reckoning, it was self-flagellation. He was not interested in self-flagellation. He had also made the decision not to open the main Potter ledger. Not from negligence. He had known the ledger existed, had known what it contained in broad terms, had known there was more to the Potter estate than the pocket money allocation in Vault 687. He had made a deliberate choice to leave it closed. To arrange access to the trust vault via a key entrusted to Hagrid, and to leave the rest of it, the account, the formal estate structure, the ledger that listed Sirius Black's name in its contacts, untouched. The calculation had been clear to him in 1981. A wealthy Harry Potter, a famous Harry Potter, a Harry Potter who knew what he was and what he came from, that boy would have been a target. The first years after Voldemort's defeat were not safe ones. His allies had not all been caught. Some were still looking. A boy whose survival was already miraculous and already political could not also afford to be visibly wealthy, visibly the heir to an ancient lineage. The Peveril connection alone could have drawn specific and dangerous attention. He had kept Harry small. Harry had been small. He had been, from what Dumbledore had allowed himself to observe in those early years, thin, quiet, in clothes that were not his own, with the particular adaptability of a child who had learned early that taking up too much room was dangerous, not the boy he would have been if anyone had thought to give him more room. The boy that 11 years of Number 4 Privet Drive had made him. Adaptable, watchful, careful with himself in the way that children should not need to be careful. Albus Dumbledore looked at his hands and arrived at the honest question. He was good at honest questions. He had always believed this about himself, and this was one of the places where he was going to find out whether it was true. The honest question was, at what point does a decision made for someone's protection become a decision made for one's own convenience? He had kept Harry invisible because it was safer. This was true. He had also kept Harry invisible because an invisible Harry was a manageable Harry, a Harry who did not know about his estate, his godfather, his lineage, his ledger, that Harry did not ask questions that were difficult to answer, did not draw attention to things that Albus had preferred to leave unexamined, did not require a conversation about why the named guardian in the Potter estate had been in Azkaban for 10 years without a trial. He sat with this for a long moment. He had known, not with certainty, but with the kind of probability that demanded acknowledgement, that Sirius might be innocent. He had known, in those early months after the imprisonment, that the evidence was circumstantial in ways that a more careful examination might have untangled. He had known that Peter Pettigrew was not, in the wizarding world's accounting, quite the kind of man who became a hero at the cost of 12 muggles. The arithmetic of character had never quite added up to the story Barty Crouch had accepted. He had not pursued it. He had not pursued it because Sirius was contained and the blood protection required the Dursleys. And the Dursleys required Harry's world to be small, and a Sirius Black, whose innocence was established, free, angry Harry's guardian, who would ask questions, who would open ledgers, who would not be moved. Sirius in Azkaban, however unjust, kept the arrangement tidy. Dumbledore arrived at this sentence in the quiet of the corridor without anyone to say it to, and sat in it. The arrangement was tidy. A child's 10 years in a house where he was not wanted, and a godfather's 10 years in a prison he had never deserved, and both of them contained and accounted for, and not inconvenient to the order of things, and he had let them both stay that way, because in the aggregate they held together neatly. They did not require him to undo anything. They did not require him to be wrong in a public, actionable way. They fit. He did not say this out loud. He did not write it down. He sat with it in the empty corridor, in the low light, and let it be what it was. He had made harder reckonings. He had sat with the knowledge of worse choices, measured against larger casualties, on the scales of a war that had lasted a generation. This was not the worst he had ever done. He was not going to pretend that it was, because pretending a smaller wrong was a larger one was also a form of evasion. It let you feel the weight of drama rather than the specific, quiet gravity of a particular boy and a particular man whose lives had both been arranged around Albus Dumbledore's preferences. This was not about a war. That was the difference. Every other reckoning had been about a war. This one was about a boy. That was what made it sit differently. He stood. He was still necessary. He was clear-eyed enough to separate the fact of his failures from the fact of his ongoing usefulness, and honest enough to recognize that conflating them, performing a uselessness he did not actually feel, would be its own kind of vanity. The blood protection still mattered. Harry still needed to reach Hogwarts in September. The world beyond the specific failures of the last 10 years was not safe, and he was among the small number of people equipped to navigate it. He would be what he was. He would support the account manager appointment and not obstruct McGonagall, and try with what remained of his professional life to hold the difference between protecting someone and controlling the circumstances of their life in view. He had not always held it. He was not certain he would always hold it. He walked back toward the lobby. The corridor was stone, the lamps were steady, and the sound of his footsteps was the only thing moving. He came around the turn in the corridor and found Harry standing near the wall, apparently waiting for nothing in particular, or waiting in the particular way of someone who is processing, and has found a quiet corner to do it in. Harry looked up when he heard the footsteps. "I have arranged for your school supplies to be purchased from the Trust Vault today," Dumbledore said. "As we had originally planned, Hagrid will take you through Diagon Alley. You should have everything you need before September." Harry looked at him. The level, measuring regard of a child who had spent a day collecting information about his own life and was not yet done sorting it. "Thank you, sir," Harry said. Just that. He didn't add anything to it, neither did Dumbledore. They walked in the same direction. The cart went deeper than Harry had expected. He had been brought through Gringotts once already, down the narrow tracks to Vault 687, where the air grew colder and the lamps gave way to darkness and the stone walls rushed past in streaks. That descent had felt substantial. This one made it look like the first step of a staircase. The account manager sat at the front of the cart, without any evident concern for the speed or the drop or the vertiginous way the tracks corkscrewed through solid rock. McGonagall held the rail with the focused composure of a person who had decided in advance that this was manageable. Hagrid, enormous behind Harry, had closed his eyes approximately 30 seconds in and had not opened them since. The air changed as they went, not just colder, older, somehow in a quality Harry couldn't name precisely, the way the air in a very old room has a different weight than the air in a new one. The tracks here were darker with age. The stone was a different color. He had the sense of passing through strata of time as much as rock, through the levels of a place that had been building itself downward for longer than anyone living had been alive. They stopped. The vault door was set into the rock face at the end of a short passage. It was large, larger than Vault 687 had been, larger than Harry had expected from a door that had been described to him as belonging to a family estate and not to a national treasury, though perhaps the distinction was finer than he had assumed. There were markings on it, not decorative, or not only. They had the quality of things that were functional first and everything else second. The account manager stepped forward and opened the vault. Green smoke came out first. It moved in the specific, unhurried way of smoke that was not interested in where it was going, but simply had been contained for a long time and was now not contained anymore. It curled out along the floor and dissipated in the passage with a faint smell that Harry couldn't identify, something mineral and old and faintly warm. Then the smoke was gone, and the vault was open. He stepped inside. The vault was not what he had been expecting, not in its scale, but in its quality. It was full in the way of a place where things had been put with intention over a long time, stacked, organized, as though someone had always meant for the person who owned it to be able to find things. He was the first person to stand here since the 31st of October 1981. Possibly the first since Fleamont and Euphemia Potter, who had died in 1978 and 1979 and left these things in disorder for whoever came after. His grandparents, he had learned their names today and hadn't had time yet to make them feel real. He was not going to take anything. The account manager had been clear about this. The stewardship review's formal conclusion was the prerequisite for any distribution from the main vault, and the review was not yet concluded. He was here because he was the account holder, and the account had been opened for the first time in 10 years, and it seemed appropriate for the account holder to stand in it. He looked at everything, he touched nothing. At the entrance of the vault, half in and half out because the doorframe was not built for a person of his dimensions, Hagrid was watching him. Harry didn't have to turn around to know this. He had become, over the course of the day, attuned to the particular quality of Hagrid's attention, which was enormous and warm and helpless in the specific way of love that wants to fix things. He looked over his shoulder. Hagrid's face was doing several things at once. Relief was the largest, the specific relief of someone who has carried a worry through a very long day and arrived somewhere not as bad as feared. And beneath it, quieter. The heartbreak of someone who loved a child for 10 years without being able to give him what he should have had. And beneath that, deeper than both, a pride that belonged to people who love without condition and without credit. He couldn't say the result was wrong. He hadn't said any of this. He was Hagrid, and Hagrid showed things rather than saying them. McGonagall was beside Harry. She looked at the vault, at the accumulated weight of it, the decades of careful placement, the physical density of a family's history that had been sitting here waiting in the dark, with an expression that was not triumph and not satisfaction and not any of the other things that felt like the wrong register for the moment. It was the steady attention of someone marking a thing that matters. The expression of a person who has been fighting for something through an entire day and has reached the place the fight was heading and is not performing the arrival, but simply standing in it. Harry looked back at the vault. He was 11 years old. He did not know what he would do with any of it. He did not know enough, yet, to know what was here, or what it was worth, or what it meant in terms of the life he was going to live. He didn't even know what his life was going to look like. September was 2 months away, and Hogwarts was a castle with 142 staircases and a lake, and everything beyond that was a shape he couldn't make out yet. But he was standing in it. He was in the doorway of a room that was his, and the door was open, and no one was going to take him out of it. He thought, asterisk, I can come back. Asterisk, not asterisk, I will take everything. Not anything so large as that, not today, just this door exists, and I can stand in it, and I can come back. The mechanism settled with the particular sound of something old and heavy, returning to its rest. The green smoke, if there had been any, was already gone. On the cart back up, the long ascent through the older rock, the newer rock, back toward the level where the marble and the lamps and the lobby were. Harry sat between Hagrid and McGonagall, and did not say anything, and neither did they, and the silence was the comfortable kind. The account card was in his pocket. The formal Gringotts record, somewhere in the bank's filing system, had his name on it as the primary account holder of the Potter estate. The Goblin account manager would administer it until Harry was 17. He would go back to school in September. He would not be unmet. Dumbledore was waiting in the lobby. He was standing in the marble hall among the witches and wizards going about their afternoon business. He looked at Harry when he came in. Harry looked back at him. There was a moment between them, not resolution and not estrangement, but acknowledgement. A day had happened and they were both in it and would carry it differently. McGonagall stepped forward. She was speaking to Harry, not to Dumbledore. "September 1st, she said. "Platform 9 3/4, King's Cross Station, London. The Hogwarts Express departs at 11 o'clock. She looked at him with the steady, unflinching attention she had given him all day. "You will not be unmet," he nodded. He meant it as a full answer, and she received it as one. He walked out of Gringotts into Diagon Alley. The afternoon was bright and busy and completely indifferent to him. In the best possible way, the wizarding world went about itself. Robes and cauldrons and owls and a man arguing outside a wand shop about something Harry didn't catch. He had arrived here this morning, not knowing his godfather's name, not knowing what was in his vault, not knowing what a Potter was besides a kind of wound that the people around him carried carefully and had never explained to him. He had been 11 for a single day. He had accumulated in that day more information about himself than in the 11 years before it combined. He put his hand in his pocket and felt the account card. Heavy parchment, gilt letters, his name pressed into it like a claim. He had a ledger, he had an account manager, he had a professor who had promised she would not leave him unmet on a station platform. He had a godfather in a prison he couldn't picture yet, whose name he now knew, and a question about that godfather that he was saving for when he had more of himself to bring to it. He had a vault in the deep rock of a bank below London, full of things in careful order, waiting. He didn't know what to do with any of it. He was 11.